Hey everybody, Steve here. I'm going to do another video here on one of my latest mods, which is this 3-pod gauge installation. I did trans temp, oil temp, and vacuum, and I'm not sure exactly how long this video series is going to be. There's a lot to show. Each of these gauges have two connections going in the back of it. One is electrical, so I'm going to have to show you all the electrical, and then the other is I guess you'd call it more mechanical. Each of these things is has a sensor on the end of it, which is tapped in, for the transmission. Or for the trans cooler, it's tapped into the trans. For the oil cooler, it's tapped into, you guessed it, an oil cooler. And the vacuum is actually tapped into the manifold. And so I'll be wanting to show you essentially both, if you want to call it the mechanical portion of the install and then the electrical portion of the install. So this might run a little bit long. I don't know how long it's going to end up being, but hopefully it'll be fun. Hopefully you'll learn something. And I know I always have a good time making these videos. It's just editing them is always the hardest part. But let's dive right in. All right, so as far as where those engine oil cooler and transmission oil cooler gauges are going to go, that big silver thing is where the engine oil cooler is going to go. I think it's right on an LS1-ish. This is a Vortec engine, but it is directly above the oil filter, and I've got a part that will replace that silver part, and it's got a thermostat on it, and it will run lines to my radiator, which is got an oil cooler in it, both a trans cooler and a engine oil cooler. Alright, so at this point I'm trying to install the gauges for the trans temp and the gauge for the oil temp, which is right there. And in both cases, the drive shaft is in my way. So the drive shaft is 4 bolts, and I'll show you where those are. I've already disconnected it, but you got to get this drive shaft out of your way. So I'm going to take this down and put it out of the way, and then that gives me fairly easy access to where I need to tap into the side of the block to do the oil cooler. But right now I'm gonna try to go after the harder of the two, which is the trans, and it is way, I just kind of right there, I think is where it is, that bolt right there. So I'm gonna go get the fitting for the trans temp sensor. All right, so I had to jack up the car in order to have a shot at getting in here. I was talking to the video camera, but that's okay. Well, but now I am putting the trans temp sensor in the test port of the transmission. And it's really hard to do with one hand. But yet I'm doing it for the pleasure of the people. All right, now it's finger tight. So there's the test board on the transmission, and the wire loom is coming off, and I pulled it kind of tight, and I'll show you where I'm holding it, but I wanted as much room as I could possibly get between the conduit and as you can see, the O2 sensor here hanging off of the exhaust pipe. So there's several inches between the two of them, but there's kind of a good view of the distance between. I've got it hugging up there, and the way I ran it up along there. So coming from where we were, here's the wiring of the transmission. Just kind of connected it right there, connected it to that hose, let it follow that hose, and then up into the grommet in the firewall. So that's kind of the way that one ran. All right, there it is again, right there, and we have our sensor in there and nice and tight, and I got the other end of the sensor right here. Can you see right there? Got the other end of the sensor right there, and I need both hands to plug them in. Okay, so believe it or not, one of the trickiest parts of this install was figuring out how to run the wiring for the sensor. You can see that it is in its final place now, which it's going to run forward to the engine, and it's going to run parallel with the oil lines. I had it originally dropping straight down, and my problem with it dropping straight down was the drive shaft, and then trying to get it over. You got the catalytic converter and all the exhaust stuff here. So long story short, you don't want to run it down and around or anywhere near the drive shaft or the exhaust pipe for obvious reasons. And it took me a while to figure out that the best way to run it was forward. So it's actually going forward, it's going to the front of the block, and then it's coming up. And then I just kind of run it along other wires until it finds its way up to the ground on the firewall. I also encased it in this wire conduit loom stuff. So basically, from the firewall, the engine oil one is held down right there, and then it continues on. I got it mated up against that. It ducks underneath the steering shaft, and then drops down. There it is right there. It drops down in front of the block, and that's where it starts to run parallel to the side of the block with the oil lines and goes into its place. All right, because of where I got my vacuum line, I had to just break off the nipple of the top of the manifold. I wasn't cutting into an existing line. So what I did for my vacuum is I just plugged up this end right here, and then here's a T-fitting, and this is where the plastic tube will go from the gauge on the inside of the car. And it's just a matter of getting this guy on there, which is easier said than done because they're about the same size. So I'm going to go ahead and fight with this off camera for a little while, because there's probably going to be some cussing involved, and I'll let you know how I end up figuring it out. But right now the camera is smack dab. I got one arm here and one arm here, and the camera's right in the way, so you got to get booted. Alright, I got it started, and there's really no easy way to do this besides to just push as hard as you can and twist, cuss some. That's definitely not the answer. That's really just a lot of cussing.